Ethan Rossi always had a world inside him that overflowed with colors and shapes. Since he was 5 years old, when he first discovered the magic of paints, he would transform any piece of paper into his own universe. In the small wooden house where he grew up, the walls of his room were covered with drawings, imaginary landscapes, faces of people he observed on the street, animals he had never seen in person. I was the son of a retired factory worker and a nursing assistant who worked grueling shifts. I grew up watching my parents come home utterly exhausted, their faces etched with the day's fatigue. Money was never abundant. Sometimes, the paycheck barely stretched to the end of the month. In the refrigerator, the empty spaces told silent stories of hard choices and sacrifices made. "Art doesn't fill the stomach, Ethan," my father would say, his voice rough with the weariness of someone who knew the weight of the world all too well. "You need to study something that gives you security, something a man does." His words felt heavy, a constant reminder of practical needs over personal dreams. Even when my high school art teacher showed my parents my exceptional drawings, talking excitedly about potential scholarships to art schools, the response from my father was dishearteningly the same. "We can't take risks like that. He needs a secure future, a real job." My mother looked worried, torn between my father's practicality and my obvious passion, but she remained silent. And so, I followed the path of security, the path laid out for me. I worked demanding physical labor jobs after school and during summers to scrape together money for my economics course at the local state university, supplementing it with student loans that felt like an anchor. During college, my notebooks held more intricate drawings in the margins than actual economic theories, but I persisted, forcing myself forward. I swallowed the lump in my throat every time I passed by an art gallery or saw someone sketching freely in the park. At 23, I landed a job at Sterling Financial Group, a large and imposing financial institution headquartered in Philadelphia. The office was located high up in the Apex Tower, a gleaming glass structure downtown with commanding views of the river. Everything inside was pristine, rigidly organized, and profoundly impersonal. I occupied a small cubicle in the quantitative analysis division, lost among rows of identical workstations. My job consisted of analyzing vast amounts of market data, feeding complex spreadsheets, and attending endless meetings where I had to feign keen interest in projections and risk assessments. It felt like a cage, albeit a well-paying one. In the beginning, in those early days, I still drew. I kept a small notepad hidden in my bag. During my lunch breaks, I'd escape to the building's rooftop garden, a small patch of green amidst the concrete jungle. There, I'd sit alone and sketch what I saw: the hurried flight of pigeons, the clouds morphing into fantastical shapes, the distant profile of a stranger on a neighboring rooftop. That's how I met Arthur. Arthur Miller had been the senior facilities manager for the Apex Tower for more than 20 years, nearing retirement at 65. He was a man with deep wrinkles etched around his kind eyes, lines that deepened significantly when he offered a rare, quiet smile. His hands were large and calloused from years of work, yet moved with a certain gentleness as he tended the rooftop plants. He always wore a flawlessly pressed gray uniform. One sunny afternoon, while I was completely absorbed in capturing the angle of a nearby skyscraper, I sensed a quiet presence behind me. I flinched slightly, startled. "You have the gift," Arthur said, his voice hoarse but unexpectedly gentle. It was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. The young, stressed-out data analyst and the wise, observant old facilities manager. During those brief lunch breaks, often amidst the quiet hum of the city below, we shared stories. Arthur spoke about Clara, his wife who had passed away 5 years prior. He described how she painted on weekends, transforming their small basement into a vibrant studio where she lost herself for countless hours. His voice softened when he spoke of her passion. She always said that painting was like breathing for her. "It wasn't a choice, Ethan. It was a necessity," Arthur recounted, his eyes shining with a mixture of longing and remembered joy. I, in turn, haltingly shared my own stifled dreams, the sketches hidden away, the secret, persistent desire to make a living from my art, a confession I had barely allowed myself to acknowledge. Arthur listened attentively, his gaze steady, making me feel as if every hesitant word truly mattered. The years slipped by, 1, 2, then 5. I was 28 now. Sterling Financial Group continued its relentless growth, swallowing smaller firms, restructuring departments. I somehow survived several rounds of layoffs, clinging to my position in the quant division. My salary had increased incrementally, but my sense of satisfaction, of purpose, had plummeted inversely. The time and energy to draw became increasingly scarce, almost non-existent. My sketchbook lay buried in a desk drawer at home, neglected. My boss, Mr. Julian Thorne, the vice president of the division, was the kind of man who seemed to thrive on wielding power and instilling fear. He criticized publicly, often humiliatingly, using sharp, cutting remarks. Praise was rare, grudging, and always delivered in private, if at all. I seemed to become his favorite target, perhaps because I never fought back, preferring quiet endurance over confrontation. Or perhaps it was because my eyes, even after 5 years drowned in spreadsheets and market data, still held a flicker of something else, some unquantifiable light that annoyed his pragmatic sensibilities. My desk was now perpetually buried under stacks of reports, urgent sticky notes demanding immediate attention, deadlines looming, and endless columns of numbers that needed to be reconciled and analyzed. My forgotten sketchbook started to gather a thin layer of dust in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet at home. Arthur noticed the change in me during our infrequent encounters in the hallways or the elevator. In the rare moments when we managed a brief exchange, he saw how my shoulders were increasingly slumped under an invisible weight, how my smile took longer to appear and faded quicker. "Life is too short for regrets, Ethan," he would say sometimes, his gaze filled with genuine concern. Clara discovered that too late, always wished she'd shown her work sooner. But I could only manage a sad, tight smile in response. "Some people have the luxury of following dreams, Arthur." My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Others need to pay the bills and the student loans. On a miserably rainy Tuesday in March, everything changed irrevocably. The atmosphere in the quantitative analysis division was tense from the moment I walked in. Whispers about a new, significant round of layoffs were circulating like a contagion through the sterile office air. Mr. Thorne called a mandatory department meeting for 10 a.m. sharp. A cold dread settled in my stomach, but I tried to push it away, clinging to logic. I was competent, meticulous, always punctual, never missed a deadline, never took a sick day unless I was practically unable to stand. Surely my performance shielded me. Surely I would be safe. The large conference room was packed, unnaturally silent. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls allowed nervous employees from other departments to observe the proceedings from the outside corridor, their faces pressed close. Mr. Thorne entered with his usual air of unshakable arrogance, flanked by two serious-looking individuals from Human Resources carrying folders. "As you all know, Sterling Financial is undergoing strategic changes to enhance shareholder value," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth, utterly detached. "We need to optimize our processes, streamline operations, and unfortunately, that means some positions have become redundant." His cold eyes scanned the room, pausing momentarily on several faces before landing squarely on me. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Mr. Rossi," he stated flatly, using my last name like a designation, not a name. "After a detailed review of departmental needs and individual performance metrics, we have concluded that your current skill set is not optimally aligned with the company's future objectives." He didn't even bother to look directly at me as he delivered the blow. "Your employment contract will be terminated effective today." The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken fear and relief from others. It felt as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over me, shocking my system into numb disbelief. My face burned with a mixture of humiliation and sudden, sharp anger. My hands began to tremble slightly, uncontrollably. Around me, colleagues who I'd shared coffee breaks, project stresses, and strained office lunches with pointedly averted their eyes. A few whispered behind their hands. Their relief was palpable, relief that it wasn't them. "You can collect your personal belongings now. HR has prepared your final documentation and severance package," Mr. Thorne concluded dismissively, already turning to the HR representatives to discuss the next item on his agenda, as if he had just commented on the dreary weather outside. I stood up on legs that felt like unsteady stilts. The walk from the conference room back to my cubicle seemed to stretch into an eternity. Each step was a monumental effort against the weight of shock and the stares, pitying, curious, or carefully indifferent, burning into my back. On my desk, standard-issue cardboard box was already waiting, placed there with cold efficiency. Mechanically, numbly, I began to pack the few personal items that marked my 5 years in that cubicle. A framed photo, a couple of worn pens, a small, resilient succulent plant, and, unearthed from the bottom drawer, the forgotten, dust-covered sketchbook. Clutching the box awkwardly, I walked down the main corridor towards the elevator bank. Employees I passed watched me with that same uncomfortable mix of pity and profound relief. Relief that the axe hadn't fallen on them today. It was then, near the polished steel elevator doors, that I saw Arthur standing quietly in the corner of the wide corridor, pushing his cleaning cart as if it were just another ordinary moment. Our eyes met across the suddenly vast space. I tried to force a semblance of a smile, a brave face, but my lips quivered, betraying the turmoil inside. Arthur approached me, his usual gentle expression replaced by one of seriousness and quiet determination. Wordlessly, he extended his wrinkled, calloused hand towards me. Resting in the center of his palm was a small, slightly oxidized golden key. It looked old, significant. "It's time," he whispered, his voice low but firm, his eyes filled with a calm certainty that momentarily cut through my daze. Confused, overwhelmed, I asked, my voice barely audible. "Time for what, Arthur?" "To breathe, Ethan," he replied, his gaze unwavering. As Clara used to say. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper on which he had neatly written down an address. Cedar Ridge Road, number 37. He pressed the key and the paper into my hand. "Clara's studio. It's been waiting for someone like you for too long." Confused, but clinging to this unexpected gesture, I took the key and the address slip. Arthur briefly explained that years ago, his late wife Clara, the talented abstract painter, had used a small, converted room next to their house as her dedicated studio. Since her passing 5 years ago, he hadn't had the heart or the courage to sell it, dismantle it, or even empty it. The space, he said, a sanctuary filled with her presence and her art, had simply remained untouched, silent, and empty for a long time. That night, after hours spent staring blankly at the ceiling in my small Philadelphia apartment, the initial shock giving way to waves of anger, fear, and a bitter sense of injustice, I finally got in my car and drove to the address Arthur had given me. Cedar Ridge Road was in a quiet, older suburb, lined with modest but well-kept houses. It felt worlds away from the cold glass tower of Sterling Financial. Number 37 was a simple, unassuming house with a neatly tended garden, dimly lit by a porch light against the lingering rain. The number was inscribed on a weathered wooden plaque near the side entrance Arthur must have meant. With trembling hands, I inserted the small golden key into the lock of a separate side door. It turned smoothly, clicking open. I pushed the door inward and stepped into what felt like another world. It was a small room, clearly converted years ago into an artist's studio. Tall, north-facing windows, though dusty now, were designed to let in ample natural light. Inside, shapes emerged from the gloom. Easels draped in white sheets like ghosts, shelves lined with jars of dried paint pigment and hardened tubes of oil color, brushes forgotten mid-rinse in turpentine-filled jars, blank canvases leaning expectantly against the walls. There were also several large, abstract canvases stacked, pulsing with unseen color even in the dimness. Clara's presence felt strong here. The air smelled thick with a mixture of dust, linseed oil, turpentine, and something else, the intangible scent of memories and concentrated creativity. In the center of the room stood a large, sturdy work table, its surface scarred with paint stains. On it lay a single, sealed envelope. My name, Ethan, was written on the front in Arthur's familiar, steady hand. I carefully opened it and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Ethan," it began. Clara always said that this studio had a special energy. She believed the walls absorbed creativity and somehow returned it, multiplied. Since she left us, this place has been silent, empty, just waiting. When I saw you sketching on the rooftop that first day, saw the focus in your eyes, the way your hand moved, I knew instantly that Clara would have loved to meet you. You share the same light, the same quiet intensity when you create. This space, her sanctuary, is now yours if you want it. Please understand, this is not charity. It's a recognition of your talent, your spirit, the artist I see you've always been. Even when the world, and perhaps yourself, tried hard to convince you otherwise. Life is too short to live someone else's dream or to let fear dictate your path. Use this place. Breathe here. Arthur. Tears welled in my eyes as I read his words, a stark contrast to the cold dismissal I'd faced just hours before. I walked slowly through the studio, touching the rough canvas surfaces, running my fingers over the paint, splattered easel legs, feeling the palpable energy of the place, the echoes of Clara's passion. On impulse, I reached out and pulled one of the dusty sheets off an easel, revealing its sturdy wooden frame, ready for a new canvas. Rummaging through a drawer in the work table, I found a thick pad of quality drawing paper and a case of charcoal sticks that still seemed perfectly usable. And then, as if something deep inside me, dormant for years, had finally been jolted awake by the day's turmoil and Arthur's incredible act of faith, I felt an overwhelming, undeniable urge to draw. Not just sketch, but truly draw. In the following months, I delved headlong into reclaiming not just the studio, but myself. The space, once thick with dust and neglect, slowly came alive again under my hands. I cleaned, organized, let the light stream in. Each brush stroke I tentatively made on a fresh canvas felt like taking a deep, liberating breath. It was a rediscovery of the passion that had always simmered beneath the surface, silenced for years by the relentless demands of adult life, student debt, and my father's rigid expectations. Initially, I painted purely for myself. Each canvas became an intimate conversation between me and my own heart, a raw, sometimes painful attempt to reclaim something precious that I feared was irrevocably lost. But even as I filled canvas after canvas, rediscovering my own style, fear remained my constant companion, a silent shadow lurking in the corners of the studio, waiting for any moment of doubt to engulf me. With the modest severance pay from Sterling Financial and the meager savings I had painstakingly accumulated over the years, I managed to support myself minimally and invest cautiously in art supplies. But the fear of failing, of pouring everything I had, financially and emotionally, into this fragile dream only to end up with nothing, was deeply ingrained. It was the same chilling fear that had haunted my childhood, the fear born from watching my parents struggle, the fear that whispered dreams were dangerous luxuries we couldn't afford. It was the echo of my father's voice. Art doesn't fill the stomach. Even in the quiet solitude of Clara's studio, surrounded by the vibrant colors spreading across my canvases, I felt the crushing weight of that insecurity. Every choice, every brushstroke felt like a high-stakes gamble against daunting odds. And yet, something stubborn inside me, newly awakened, refused to give up, refused to retreat back into the gray numbness, even when doubt screamed the loudest. I knew, with a certainty that scared and thrilled me, that it was time to take the risk. but the fear of crashing, of returning to square one, of proving my father right, of being unable to support myself doing the one thing that made me feel alive, was still a formidable obstacle I had to consciously battle every single day. Throughout this turbulent period, I maintained my quiet friendship with Arthur. He'd visit occasionally, bringing coffee, offering silent encouragement simply by looking at my work with genuine interest. He invited a few trusted friends and acquaintances to see my paintings, subtly promoting my work within his circle. The first painting I sold was to his niece, Emily Carter, an interior coordinator. She'd been looking for a unique abstract piece for a client's new downtown loft and fell in love with one of my bolder, more expressive canvases. The payment was modest, far less than a single day's pay at Sterling, but the feeling, the validation that someone valued my art enough to actually pay for it, was utterly indescribable. A spark ignited. Slowly, tentatively, other orders started to trickle in, mostly through word of mouth, thanks to Arthur and Emily. With each commission completed, each positive reaction, my confidence grew millimeter by millimeter. I insisted on starting to pay Arthur a fair rent for the studio space, even though he protested initially, saying Clara would have wanted me to have it freely. Reimagining and revitalizing the place that had been so dear to his wife, seeing it filled with life and creation once again, seemed to bring him a quiet joy too. Within 6 months, I had cultivated a small but loyal clientele in the Philadelphia area. I cautiously expanded my work, taking on commissions for specific spaces, creating a series of illustrations for a local author's self-published children's book, and even painting a small mural in a neighborhood cafe whose owner loved my style. I built a simple online portfolio to showcase my work beyond local connections. Orders gradually increased, demanding more of my time and energy in a way that felt exhilarating rather than draining. Eventually, I had to hire a part-time assistant, a college art student, just to help manage the administrative side, inquiries, invoicing, scheduling. The studio truly came back to life. I replaced the oldest, dried-up paints, carefully renovated the walls while preserving the original character, and installed better, professional lighting. But I consciously kept the essence of the space intact, respecting Clara Miller's memory and artistic spirit. On a special shelf, cleaned and given pride of place, I positioned a small, framed photograph of her I'd found tucked away among her belongings. It showed a woman in her prime, maybe mid-40s, smiling warmly in front of a large, dynamic abstract canvas, paint smudged on her fingers, brushes held confidently in her hand, her eyes sparkling with passion. She looked happy. She looked free. 2 years after being unceremoniously laid off from Sterling Financial Group, I was living solely from my art. It wasn't extravagant living, not yet, but it was mine, earned through my own hands and my own vision. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely complete, integrated. My name, Ethan Rossi, was slowly starting to be recognized within the regional art circuit, appearing in local gallery listings and art blogs. One crisp autumn afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was the owner of a respected contemporary art gallery in downtown Philadelphia. She had seen my work online and at the cafe and wanted to discuss representing me, potentially offering me a solo exhibition the following year. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white, barely daring to believe it was real. Amidst all this burgeoning activity and cautious optimism, I had been working on a special, personal piece for weeks, stealing hours for it in the intervals between commissions. It felt important, necessary. It was a double portrait inspired by an old, yellowed photograph I had discovered hidden deep within a drawer in Clara's old work table. In the faded photo, a much younger Arthur and Clara, perhaps in their late 30s or early 40s, stood smiling broadly at the camera, arms around each other, in front of a sun-dappled lake. They looked so happy, so full of life and shared dreams. I carefully studied their younger faces, the genuine smiles reaching their eyes, the unmistakable light of love and partnership between them. Then, using other, more recent photos of Arthur and the one I had of Clara in her studio, I adapted the image, translating it onto a large canvas. In my painting, Arthur and Clara were older, as they would have been now, with strands of silver in their hair, their faces carrying the lines of lived experiences. Yet, I made sure to capture the same enduring sparkle in their eyes, the same deep connection, painting them as if they had been allowed to grow old together, side by side, the way they should have if fate hadn't intervened. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon, I called Arthur, asking him to stop by the studio, telling him I had some new works to show him. He arrived looking proud, as always, like a supportive father figure, eager to see my latest progress. Instead of showing him the commissioned pieces first, I led him towards the back room of the studio, where the special painting stood on an easel, covered carefully by a plain cloth. "I have something for you, Arthur," I said softly, my heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. I gently pulled away the cloth. Arthur stood absolutely motionless in front of the canvas. His eyes, usually so calm and observant, widened slightly, then filled with tears that began to trace paths down his weathered cheeks. He gazed intently at the portrait, at himself and Clara, aged together on the canvas, existing in an alternate, painted reality where she was still vibrantly by his side. "How?" he finally whispered, his voice choked with raw emotion, barely audible. He reached out a trembling hand, almost touching the painted image of Clara's face. "I found an old photograph of you too," I explained quietly. "The rest? Well, the rest was imagination and gratitude." I stepped closer and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "You gave me so much more than just a studio, Arthur." My own voice thickened with emotion. "You gave me back the courage to be myself." Arthur, a man of few words but profound wisdom, turned slowly from the painting to look at me, his eyes still glistening. He grasped my hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. He cleared his throat. "Life is too short for regrets, Ethan," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual steadiness, imbued with the weight of experience. "The right doors often open when we least expect them, sometimes after others have slammed shut." He paused, holding my gaze. "But it's up to us, each of us, to find the courage to walk through them." And I, Ethan Rossi, standing there in my brightly lit studio, surrounded by my work, my hands stained with paint, looking at the fulfilling, authentic life I was painstakingly building for myself, could not help but agree with every fiber of my being. I was finally ready to live intensely, to embrace the uncertainty. And above all, I had learned the hard way not to let fear, not my father's expectations, not financial insecurity, not self-doubt, prevent me from doing what truly mattered. I was breathing again,